All right, ready to dive into something pretty cool?
I'm all ears.
Today we're looking at something called lab on a rotor.
Catchy, right.
Definitely. It's all about centrifugal microfluidics and basically shrinking a whole lab onto a disk.
All thanks to the power of spinning.
Right. Imagine you're at a party and someone brings up medical breakthroughs.
And you casually mention tiny spinning discs that can diagnose diseases?
Exactly. People will be blown away.
It's pretty amazing, especially how fast and efficient these devices are.
So tell me, how does spinning actually help with lab tests?
Well, it's similar to a centrifuge in that it uses centrifugal force.
Okay.
But instead of just spinning samples, we're talking about controlling tiny droplets of fluids as they move through channels on a disk.
So you're not just spinning things around.
No.
There's actual precise movement happening.
Exactly. Think of it like a microscopic water park.
With centrifugal force as the pump.
Yeah. Pushing the water through slides and tunnels.
So it's about control, not just speed. That's pretty wild. But what makes this better than a regular lab test?
Well, one of the big advantages is the tiny amount of liquid needed.
So less waste.
Yeah, lower costs too, and smaller footprint on the environment.
So it's like the ultimate eco-friendly lab. Less is more. But how do you actually get results from such tiny samples?
That's where things get really interesting. It's all about integration. These platforms handle everything.
Like what?
Prepping the sample, mixing the reagents,
Okay.
detecting, analyzing, all on a single device.
Hold on. So no separate steps, no moving things between test tubes and machines. It all happens on this one disk.
Exactly. Imagine the possibilities. And because these devices are so small,
Right.
they're perfect for something called point-of-care diagnostics.
Point-of-care diagnostics. Okay, I need to hear more about this.
Okay, so think about doctors in a remote village
Okay.
diagnosing diseases with something the size of a smartphone.
No more sending samples to labs and waiting weeks.
Exactly.
Wow. That is a total game changer. Faster results, less waste, and accessible healthcare, all because of his spinning disk. You know, I thought this was going to be a pretty dry chemistry lesson, but this is amazing.
Just wait, it gets even more interesting when we get into how they are designed and all the incredible applications.
Well, don't leave me hanging. Let's hear it.
So we've got this tiny spinning disk, right? Let's zoom in and see how it actually works. It's all about these microscopic channels etched onto the surface.
So it's not just a plain disk.
Oh, no, there's a lot going on. It's got all this built-in architecture.
Like what?
Think of it like a city map, but for fluids.
Okay.
Carefully planned routes, guiding the fluids, mixing them, even separating components, all with crazy precision.
Wow. So it's like a tiny city, bustling with chemical activity. But how do you direct all the traffic in this micro-metropolis?
Well, that's where things like valves and chambers come in.
Oh, okay, like traffic light and roundabouts.
Exactly, directing the flow at different points during the test.
So spinning force moves things along the channels of the roads, and these valves and changers control the flow. That's pretty brilliant. But how do you actually design and build something so tiny?
It takes some serious tech, yeah.
I bet.
We use things like photolithography.
Photo what?
Photolithography, basically using lasers to etch patterns onto the disk.
Oh, okay. So kind of like 3D printing, but with lasers. And super tiny.
You got it.
Okay, so I get the concept, but I need an example. How does all this actually work in a real test?
Sure. Imagine a simple blood test.
Okay.
In a normal lab, you draw a vial of blood, separate the cells from the plasma, mix in reagents, then analyze it all. With a centrifugal microfluidic device, all those steps, they can happen on one disk.
Wait, seriously. So the blood goes to one end, spins around, and comes out with a diagnosis?
Pretty much. The channels are designed to separate the blood, mix the plasma with the right stuff, and then direct it to a sensor. Boom, results.
That is incredible. It really is like shrinking down a whole lab onto one disk. And you mentioned this could be used for more than just blood tests, right?
Absolutely. You can change up the design of the channels and chambers and test for all sorts of things.
Like what?
Heavy metals and water, analyzing soil samples, even screening food.
It's like a Swiss Army knife of lab tests, all thanks to this little spinning disk. But the actual detection part, that must vary depending on what you're looking for, right?
Exactly. There are so many different ways to detect things.
Like what?
You can have optical sensors that look for color changes, electrochemical detectors that measure electrical signal. There are even tiny mass spectrometers that identify specific molecules.
Okay, my mind is officially blown. It's not just shrinking the process. You're shrinking the tools themselves. This is some serious sci-fi stuff. But what are these disks even made of? Is it like computer chips?
Not necessarily. Silicon's common, but we also use polymers, glass, even paper-based materials.
Oh, wow, paper.
Yeah. It all depends on what the test needs.
So it's not just about making it small, it's about using the right material too. Makes sense. But how do you actually make these intricate things? Are we talking tiny robots assembling them piece by piece?
Not quite robots, but the manufacturing is pretty high-tech.
Like what?
Things like micromachining, which uses tiny drills and cutters, or even 3D printing, where we build it layer by layer.
So a mix of high-tech and traditional crafting, all happening on a microscopic scale. It's truly mind-boggling. But I'm guessing these devices must be pretty expensive to make.
It's a challenge, yes. The initial development and manufacturing can be pricey,
I can imagine.
but the long-term potential is huge. They use fewer reagents, less manual labor, so costs should come down a lot as things progress.
That's good to hear. It feels like we're really at the start of something big. But before we look too far ahead, let's take a step back and recap what we've learned here, just to make sure I'm following along.
Of course, we've essentially looked under the hood of these lab-on-a-rotor devices, seeing how all the channels, valves, and chambers work together. We've talked about the manufacturing and the different ways to detect things.
And I'm starting to get a sense of how big this could be, for everything from healthcare to the environment. But what's next? What does the future hold for centrifugal microfluidics?
Now, that's a great question, and one that I'm excited to explore with you in the last part of our deep dive.
All right, so we've seen how these tiny labs on a disk actually work. But what's the big deal? Why should we be so excited about this whole centrifugal microfluidics thing? What could it really do?
Well, imagine a world where anyone, anywhere, can get top-notch medical testing. That's the potential here.
That's a pretty big statement.
It is, yeah, but we're not just talking about faster, cheaper tests. This could really change how accessible healthcare is.
Okay, I'm not quite seeing the connection. How does spitting a little disk make healthcare more accessible?
Well, think about it. These devices, they're portable, they're relatively inexpensive, and they're easy to use. So you could take them anywhere, remote villages, disaster zones, even just use them at home and still get quick and accurate results.
So instead of sending a sample off to a lab and waiting weeks, a doctor can diagnose someone on the spot and start treatment right away.
Exactly. And it's not just diagnosing. You can monitor chronic conditions, tailor treatments based on a patient's genes, even screen for potential problems before they become serious.
Wow. It's like having a personal health lab right there in your pocket.
It really is.
But what about beyond healthcare? You mentioned other applications.
Oh, there are so many possibilities. Environmental monitoring, for one. Imagine using these devices to test water or air quality.
Okay, yeah.
And food safety, making sure what we eat is safe. Agriculture, even. Analyzing soil health to help crops grow better.
So not just human health, but the health of the whole planet. It seems like these little spinning disks could do just about anything.
The potential is huge. But of course, any powerful technology needs to be used responsibly.
Right, of course.
We need to ensure these devices are accurate and reliable, and that everyone who needs them can actually get them.
It's easy to get caught up in all the possibilities, but we can't forget about the ethical side of things.
Absolutely. That's always important to consider.
So where do we go from here? What's next for this whole field?
Well, the future is pretty exciting, I think. We're going to see even smaller devices, even more integrated. Imagine testing for tons of things at once, analyzing all sorts of different samples, maybe even incorporating AI to help interpret the results.
So smaller, smarter, more powerful.
Exactly.
It's incredible to think about.
It really is.
Well, this has been a fascinating journey into the world of lab on a rotor. We've learned about centrifugal microfluidics, how it works, and all the amazing things it can do. And who knows, maybe the next time you're at a party, you'll be the one explaining all this to someone.
I think they'd be impressed.
Definitely impressive stuff. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.